The sun hung low over the barren plains, its fading light painting the horizon in streaks of red and gold. A lone cowboy rode slowly across the land, his silhouette framed against the endless sky. Dust rose with every hoofbeat, and the only sound besides the creak of saddle leather was the mournful cry of the wind. It was a lonely stretch of country, hard, empty, and unforgiving. As he crested a small rise, something unusual caught his eye near a cluster of mesquite brush. Two small figures crouched in the dirt, barely moving. He pulled back on the reins, squinting against the sun. They were children, two Apache girls no more than 8 or 9. Their clothes were torn, their hair tangled, their eyes wide with fear. The cowboy swung down from his horse, boots crunching against the dry earth. The girls shrank back, clutching each other tightly, their faces streaked with dust. It didn't take much to see they were lost and cold, maybe hungry. They looked like they hadn't seen safety in days. He removed his hat and knelt slowly, making his movements calm, steady. "Easy now," he said in a low voice, the kind you'd use with a skittish colt. His horse shifted behind him, snorting softly, as if sensing the tension. The girls didn't answer, but their breathing slowed as his presence softened the edge of their fear. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small canteen, placing it on the ground in front of them. After a long, cautious pause, one of the girls reached forward, lifted it, and took a drink. The other followed, their trust hesitant but real. The cowboy smiled faintly, tipping his head. "You're safe now," he murmured. He didn't ask how they'd come to be here, or what dangers they'd fled. All that mattered was that they were alive, and he'd found them before the prairie claimed them for good. As twilight deepened and the first stars pricked the sky, he guided the girls toward his horse. With gentle hands he lifted them one by one into the saddle, then mounted behind, steadying them against him. The plains stretched out ahead, dark and uncertain, but the cowboy's jaw was set. He wasn't about to leave 2 frightened children to the mercy of the wild. On that lonely ride into night, his quiet courage became their lifeline, and the story of trust began. By the time the cowboy reached his outpost, night had settled across the plains. The moon rode high above, silver light washing over the weathered cabin and the small corral beside it. It wasn't much, just a rough shack built from split logs with a lean-to for his horse and a fire pit ringed with stones. But out here, even the simplest shelter could mean the difference between survival and despair. He swung down from the saddle, lifting the 2 Apache girls gently to the ground. They clung to each other, eyes darting toward the shadows as if afraid the darkness might swallow them. The cowboy led them inside, striking flint against steel until a warm flame flickered to life in the hearth. The glow painted the walls with dancing light, chasing away the chill. He rummaged through his supplies, setting out a tin pot and filling it with water from his canteen. Soon the crackle of boiling water and the smell of beans and salt pork filled the air. The girls sat huddled near the fire, watching his every move with wary eyes. He spoke little, just a word or two here and there, but his silence was steady, never threatening. When the food was ready, he set 2 tin plates before them. For a moment they hesitated, glancing at him as though unsure if this kindness was real. Then hunger won over fear. They ate in quick, small bites, their thin shoulders relaxing as the warmth of food reached them. The cowboy sat opposite, chewing slowly, pretending not to notice the way they studied him between mouthfuls. Afterward, he offered them a wool blanket, spreading it across the straw-padded corner where they could rest. The girls curled beneath it, their heads close together, whispering in their own tongue. He couldn't understand the words, but the sound was softer now, less sharp with fear. The cowboy leaned back in his chair, boots stretched toward the fire, and watched them drift into uneasy sleep. Something stirred in him, something he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't duty or obligation. It was a quiet bond, fragile as dawn, born in the flicker of firelight and the simple act of offering safety. Outside, the wind moaned against the boards of the cabin. Inside, 3 souls, once strangers, found the first traces of trust. Morning came clear and cold, the kind of day when the plains sky stretched forever, pale and merciless. The cowboy saddled his horse, lifting the 2 Apache girls into the saddle before him. Their small hands clutched the worn leather horn as he guided the animal toward town. They needed more than beans and blankets, supplies, medicine perhaps, and a safe path back to their people. The town lay just a few miles off, a scatter of clapboard buildings and muddy streets already stirring with the noise of wagons and shopkeepers. But as the cowboy rode down the main street, the usual rhythm faltered. Heads turned. Conversation stopped. Mothers pulled their children a little closer. Shopkeepers leaned in their doorways, and a group of ranch hands spat into the dust, their eyes narrowing. The reason was plain. 2 Apache girls sat on a cowboy's horse, and old fears ran deep in this frontier town. "Look there," someone muttered. "Bringing wild blood right into town." Another voice rose sharper. "What's he thinking, riding in like that?" The girls felt the weight of those stares, their small bodies pressing tighter against him. He kept his face forward, jaw set, hat brim shadowing his eyes. At the end of the street, the sheriff stepped out from the boardwalk, thumbs hooked in his gun belt. His grin was cold, thin as wire. "You're making a mistake, cowboy," he drawled. "Town don't take kindly to strays, especially Apache strays." The cowboy reined in, his voice steady, low. "They're children. Lost, hungry. That's all you need to know," the sheriff chuckled, glancing at the gathering crowd. "Children grow up, and trouble grows with them. You'd best turn 'em loose before their kind comes looking." A murmur rippled through the bystanders, half agreement, half unease. The cowboy scanned their faces, men and women hardened by years on the edge of survival, suspicion carved deep into them. He felt the girls trembling against him, and that settled the matter. "I'll see to 'em," he said firmly. "They're under my care now." Something in his tone silenced the street. The sheriff's smirk faded, but he didn't press further. With a disdainful shake of his head, he stepped aside. The cowboy nudged his horse forward, leading the girls through the uneasy stairs, dust swirling at their heels. Every whisper followed them, yet he didn't look back. For all their prejudice, the town had seen a man stand his ground. And for the 2 small souls on his saddle, he'd shown the world that kindness could be stronger than fear. The sun had barely lifted above the rooftops when the sound of hoofbeats echoed from the far end of town. Folks who had gathered at the livery paused, turning their heads. A lone rider approached from the open plains, a woman astride a painted horse, her posture straight, her face marked by both weariness and strength. Her dress was simple buckskin, adorned with beadwork that glimmered faintly in the morning light. Long black hair trailed down her shoulders, braided and tied with leather cords. Her dark eyes scanned the street with piercing intensity, sharp enough to make the most talkative townsman hold his tongue. The children saw her first. From their seat on the cowboy's saddle, they stiffened, then cried out in recognition. Before he could dismount, the 2 girls scrambled down, running across the dirt street with arms outstretched. The woman leapt from her horse, dropping to her knees as they collided into her embrace. The reunion was fierce, desperate, and tender all at once, tears mixing with dust, laughter breaking through sobs. The townsfolk, who had muttered and sneered the day before, fell into a hush. Some shifted uncomfortably, others watched with narrowed eyes, suspicion battling against the undeniable truth of a mother finding her children. The cowboy stood quietly by his horse, hat in hand, giving the family their moment. When at last the woman rose, still holding her daughters close, she turned to him. For a long heartbeat, her gaze lingered, measuring the man who had guarded what was most precious to her. She stepped forward. In her eyes burned gratitude, but also something unspoken, something older than words. In a voice calm yet resonant, she said, "You kept them alive. For that I owe you more than thanks." The sheriff leaned against a post, arms crossed, his mouth twisted into a smirk. "Careful, cowboy. You've made yourself friends with trouble." But his words fell flat against the quiet dignity of the woman and the steady resolve in the cowboy's stance. Ignoring the sheriff, the mother reached into a pouch at her side. From it she drew a small object, an amulet fashioned from bone, feathers, and stone, bound with sinew. She held it out with both hands, presenting it not as trinket, but as something sacred. "This," she said softly, "is a gift of protection. It carries the strength of my people. You saved my daughters. Let this stand guard over you." The cowboy did not refuse. He accepted the token with a nod, tucking it gently into his coat pocket. He hadn't helped the girls for reward, but the weight of that amulet felt heavier than gold. And as the mother led her daughters back toward their horse, the crowd remained silent, caught between fear and respect, while the cowboy quietly remounted his own. The street was still heavy with silence after the reunion. The mother kept her daughters close, one hand resting on their shoulders as though she might never let them go again. Dust drifted lazily through the air, stirred by the hooves of her horse, and the gathered townsfolk shuffled uneasily, torn between curiosity and their own lingering prejudice. The woman turned her attention back to the cowboy. For a long moment she simply studied him, as though trying to see past the dust and leather to the man beneath. Her daughters clung to her legs, but their eyes never strayed from the tall stranger who had brought them back. At last, she stepped forward. In her hand she carried a small leather pouch, worn smooth with age, the beads and feathers tied to it whispering faintly in the wind. Her voice was low, yet carried across the square. "You gave back what cannot be replaced," she said, her gaze steady. "For that I have nothing equal to offer. But what I carry I now give to you." The cowboy shifted slightly, unused to such ceremony. He held his hat against his chest, his expression unreadable, but his eyes showed respect. The mother extended the pouch toward him. "This medicine bundle belonged to my father. It carries the prayers of my people, the strength of the earth, the spirit of protection. As long as you keep it close, no shadow will easily touch you." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some scoffed quietly, dismissing it as nothing more than superstition. "Charms and feathers," one man whispered. "Won't stop a bullet." Others leaned forward, uneasy yet captivated, as though they sensed a power older than the town itself. The cowboy didn't hesitate. He accepted the bundle with both hands, bowing his head slightly in acknowledgement. He tucked it carefully into his coat, not as a prize, but as a trust given in earnest. When he looked up, his voice was calm and firm. "I didn't help them for reward," he said, "but I'll carry this with the respect it deserves." The mother's lips curved into the faintest smile, though her eyes remained solemn. "Then it will serve you well," the sheriff snorted from his place near the saloon. "Fool's trinket," he muttered, but even he didn't say it too loud. Something about the way the woman carried herself, the way the cowboy received the gift, made mockery feel dangerous. As the sun climbed higher, the small ceremony ended, but the weight of it lingered. The cowboy had not only saved 2 children, he had been entrusted with something sacred. To some it was nothing but beads and leather. To others it was a bond, a promise between 2 worlds that rarely touched. And for the cowboy, it was a reminder. True worth wasn't measured in gold, but in trust earned and respect freely given. By the time the sun began to sink behind the far hills, the commotion in town had quieted. The Apache woman and her daughters stood together, their figures framed in the amber glow of late afternoon. The girls clutched their mother's hands tightly, but their faces, once tight with fear, were now bright with relief. They smiled and waved as the cowboy mounted his horse, their small voices calling out in gratitude. The cowboy tipped his hat in return, the brim casting a shadow across his steady eyes. He had never been one for long goodbyes. Words didn't come easy to him, but the gesture, the lift of his hat, the firm nod spoke enough. He nudged his horse forward, the animal's hooves striking a slow, measured rhythm against the dusty street. The pouch the woman had given him rested inside his coat, its weight unfamiliar yet oddly grounding. He thought of her words, that it carried protection, the strength of earth and spirit. Whether charm, prayer, or simply memory, it meant something far greater than a trinket. It was a symbol of trust, a bridge built in a world where such bridges were rare. Around him, the town stirred with divided whispers. Some men spat into the dirt, muttering that he'd been a fool to get mixed up with Apache matters. Others watched him with something close to admiration, seeing in his actions a courage they themselves lacked. Respect and resentment walked side by side in that place, but neither slowed the cowboy's ride. Out beyond the last fences and worn wagon tracks, the land stretched wide and open, painted gold by the falling sun. The horizon called to him as it always had. He rode steady, the weight of the medicine pouch a reminder that sometimes a man carried more than his own burdens. Sometimes he carried the hopes of others. And as the town faded behind him, he allowed himself one final thought. The greatest treasures weren't gold or land, or even the fleeting praise of men. They were the bonds forged in moments of mercy, the trust of the innocent, the gratitude of the saved. With that truth in his heart, the cowboy rode on into tomorrow.